We are waiting for one more person, the keynote speaker. Okay, we will start, and the keynote speaker will come after the little video. Okay, so good morning and good afternoon to everybody from UNESCO's headquarters in Paris. Welcome to this second edition of the UNESCO series of Regional Expert Consultations against Racism and Discrimination. I am Anna Maria Mylöv, and I am the acting chief of the Inclusion and Rights section. Let me first of all remind all of you that we have English and French interpretation, and you can choose the language by clicking on the globe. I think it is on your screen. It should be on the right below. We would like to begin by presenting to you a very short video clip published by UNESCO. It is entitled United Against Racism, which rallies leading personalities to fight racial discrimination. The video clip is also available on UNESCO's YouTube channel, as well as on other social media. Shahad, please. There is no sound.
L'apartheid a été une réalité.
Many of us like to think of racism as something from the past, something that no longer holds sway over our societies, something that no longer exists.
But World War II took place less than a century ago. Survivors of the Holocaust are still alive today.
The Jim Crow laws were enforced until 1965.
L'apartheid a été une réalité jusqu'en 1991.
We live in a world where people face barriers to education, employment, health, justice, and culture just because of the color of their skin.
Where people are discriminated against, excluded, stigmatized, attacked, or even murdered.
Just because of where they come from, what they look like, or what they believe in.
No more.
No more. No more.
Hoy decimos, basta.
El racismo y la discriminación son causados por la ignorancia y el miedo a lo que creemos diferente.
ويخترقان هياكلنا الإدارية وثقافتنا الشعبية وتحيزنا وفرضياتنا اللاواعية.
But this doesn't have to be the case.
You Me, us, we can create the change that we want.
By defending quality education for all, we can combat the root causes of deadly stereotypes and prejudices.
By developing historical knowledge and critical thinking, we can improve our understanding of the past.
By encouraging cultural diversity, especially at the local level, we can build societies that are more respectful of others.
By empowering the younger generation,
We can help them shape the world.
So, stop watching from the sideline.
Read, observe, learn, and listen.
we must hold ourselves accountable.
We must hold our societies accountable.
We are all one humanity.
Keep quiet is not an option.
Is not an option.
Di lo que piensas.
Speak up.
Speak up. Take action.
Take action.
Take action.
So thank you to all these personalities who accepted to shoot the video clip for UNESCO. We are still waiting for our keynote speaker who is on her way. So let's wait one more minute.
Perhaps I can maybe do some introductions of our panelists just to, and then when Gabriela Ramos arrives, we can then have her give the opening remarks, the keynote remarks, so that we don't lose time. I think that's okay with everybody. Let me talk a little bit about some of the people that we're going to be talking to today. And the guy who's talking is George Papianis. I am the Chief of Media Services at UNESCO. And I have to say, it's a distinct honor for me to be with this panel and to be joining my colleagues on this particular issue, something that we all feel very, very strongly about dealing with and bringing an end to. And of course, what I'm talking about is racism. In order to further explore the issues around this in the period of COVID, I say that we have assembled a very wonderful panel of individuals, and I'll give a brief bio on each of them, and beginning with Martin Luther King III. Martin, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Of course, Martin Luther King III is an American human rights activist, a community leader, author, and politician. He is one of the 4 children of the prominent civil rights movement leader, Martin Luther King Jr., and his wife, Coretta Scott King. Throughout his life, Martin Luther King III has worked with individuals deeply committed to the struggle for human rights and a nonviolent society, certainly keeping the flame of his family's legacy alive. He has been also the Chief Executive Officer of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center in Atlanta. Martin Luther King III, great to have you with us. Also joining us is Professor Jane Landers. Professor Landers is an historian of colonial Latin America and the Atlantic world, specializing in the history of Africans and their descendants in those words. She is the author of Atlantic Creoles in the Age of Revolutions, which was awarded the Rembert Patrick Book Award. Professor Landers has been a member of UNESCO's International Scientific Committee on the Slave Route Project since 2015. Professor Landers, wonderful for you to join us.
Thank you.
Professor Na Afua Daldesen Cooper. Professor Cooper is an educator, historian, women's empowerment advocate, poet, and considered one of the most influential and pioneering voices in the Canadian dub poetry and spoken word movement. She is an internationally ranked historian and has taught Caribbean cultural studies, history, women's studies, and Black studies at Ryerson and York Universities, at the University of Toronto, and at Dalhousie University. Professor Cooper, a pleasure, and thank you for being with us. Alice Mckay, thank you. Alice Mckay is the president of Montreal's Youth City Council while pursuing a master's degree in urban planning at the University of Montreal. that Ms. Mckay began to think about ways to improve the city, whether through concrete or political action. Her academic research focused on youth and public spaces in Hanoi, Vietnam, which aimed to make the voice of youth, often neglected in the issues of planning and democracy, heard. Alice Mckay, thank you very much for being with us. It's a pleasure, and we look forward to your interventions. Webster, I'm going to say Webster, also known as Ali Ndiaye, because I think he's more known as Webster, is a veteran of the Quebec hip-hop scene since 1995, passionate about history, particularly interested in slavery and the Black presence in Quebec and Canada since the time of New France. Webster is the author of a hip-hop writing textbook, À l'ombre des feuilles, of a children's book about Oliver le Jeune, the first African slave in Canada, and Le Grain de Sable, and a booklet, Slavery in Canada. Webster is also a collaborator of UNESCO for its masterclass series against racism and discriminations. I think I've covered everybody. That's quite a group, and very excited again, Webster, to have you with us and to bring the artistic elements as well, along with those who have been involved in civil rights, those who are academics, and those who are at the community level trying to make a difference. So very much excited to have you with us. Let me see where we are about introducing the Assistant Director General, if she should happen to be nearby.
She is going to connect when she is finishing her first webinar. So I suggest that you just start.
Well, my goodness. Okay, we're gonna wing it. And Webster, I just saw you having some tea there, so cheers to you as well. And
thank you. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with you. We have to keep those vocal cords lubricated. So let us begin. Let me just double check. Is there anything more that you Anna Maria, that we need to kind of deal with at this time, or are we all set the way we are?
I think that we're all set.
Okay.
Everything is fine. Just go ahead.
I like that idea. Then what I'm going to do is to kind of bring things together. I am going to start off with a couple of quotes, which I think will help contextualize our conversation. And these quotes, I think, are important for us to remember. One of these quotes is from James Baldwin. Of course, I think somebody that most people will recognize, James Baldwin, the African-American author. And this is from Black English, A Dishonest Argument. And he said, "History is not the past, it is the present. We carry our history with us. We are our history." I think that's an important statement to contextualize our conversation, along with another from George Santayana, something that probably we've all quoted or appropriated in one way or another. Santayana, well-known philosopher and writer. "Those who do not know history's mistakes are doomed to repeat them." And so I think that helps us maybe provide a little bit of a framework, a little bit of an introduction to our conversation today. The goal of our discussion is going to essentially be to arrive at a point where we have actionable recommendations to guide UNESCO's work together with its partners. I think all of you are aware of the fact that at the end of this discussion, when we get toward the end, we'll have a few minutes left over for you to kind of give us 1, 2, 3, just a recommendation as to what you think is a good way for us to continue to unpack this very complex issue, which has different facets around the world. I mean, it is not just something in North America. North America has a particular history in this regard. But we're dealing with a global issue here, and racism and disenfranchisement, disenfranchisement, discrimination. They all rear their ugly heads in one way or another in many countries, and not, in fact, if not all countries around the world. And so we must be cognizant of this fact that race as a social construct has been instrumentalized and has, in fact, normalized acts and behaviors that lead to discrimination, inequalities, and injustice. COVID-19 pandemic, kind of a overarching platform on which we stand today, has certainly exacerbated these fissures. And what does that mean? And how do we deal with that? How do we address the deep-rooted legacies of racism that have prevailed and are still, I guess we would say, still inflicting wounds that weaken the moral fiber of our societies? And so with that in mind, I think we have ourselves quite a tall order ahead of us as we move forward and begin to talk about these issues. I will also let the community that has joined us in our conversation to be aware of the fact that we'll also have about, I'd say, within about the next 30 to 40 minutes, an opportunity for them to post some questions, and I'll be reading those questions either to the group or to, if they're directed to any one particular individual. And so I'm going to start off with Martin Luther King Jr. The third. I would like to get a sense from you, Martin. How has the COVID-19 pandemic in some ways exploited the consequences of racism on Black communities in the United States?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question, and thank you for the opportunity. It is an honor to be with each and every panelist today and to be a part of what UNESCO is doing throughout the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted not just the Black community, but communities of color in general, far more tragically than others, even from our indigenous population, the Native American population or Indian population, or First Nations populations around the world. Largely because there's a healthcare crisis in the United States and maybe even around the world, but as it relates to the United States, the African American community disproportionately is represented in areas of diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, and just about everything else. Part of that is the healthcare system. Part of it is just the stress of the topic that we're talking about, which is racism, which creates an additional barrier that other populations may have to deal with in a different way. So you add all those stresses, and then you add the pandemic of COVID-19, and it is exacerbated. So at the end of the day, we will find that in the African American community, in the Latino and Hispanic community, in the Native American community, there have been more deaths of COVID-19 than other populations, although any death is tragic and should not have happened. I'd also have to say, although this question was not asked, while none of us created or can directly say how this pandemic came about, maybe some scientists can, and maybe one of the professors may have a point of view. But the fact of the matter is how a country has chosen to deal with that crisis is really what the issue is. And unfortunately, the leadership of our nation did not even acknowledge the crisis as it was being delivered. It has been confirmed now through interviews that the President of the United States wanted to suppress this reality. And all of that is unfortunate. You always have to, before you're going to deal with any issue, you have to acknowledge it exists. Whether it's racism, whether it's sexism, whether it's homophobia, whether it's xenophobia, whatever the issue is, whether it's poverty, until you acknowledge that this is a problem that we must all have all hands on deck to address, you'll never address it. And unfortunately, in our country, we did not have that proper leadership. And so we are suffering at significant levels beyond perhaps what anyone should.
Professor Cooper, if I could bring you into this part of the conversation, would you say that we're at a time in Canada where there are similarities in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on minority populations, Black communities, and Indigenous communities? Is it similar in Canada as it is to the United States, and has been expressed by Martin in this part of our opening session?
Thank you, George. Indeed, it's very similar. It's if you look in the mirror, it would be the same thing. I would like to stress, though, as in the United States, in Canada, Black people, Black populations are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. The Black body is a site where COVID-19 meets racism in Canada. 21% of all reported cases in the city of Toronto, for example, affect Black people. Yet Black people in that particular city make up only 9% of the population. When we look federally across the country, 22% of all COVID-19 cases affect Black Canadians. Yet Black Canadians federally make up only 3% of the population. So what we have here is a situation, it has impacted other communities, especially Indigenous communities, but the Black body is the one that's taking the brunt of COVID-19 in Canada. And there's many reasons for it. You know, the pandemic hit at a time when we in Canada were demonstrating against police brutality. I mean, for the past 5 years, we've had ongoing demonstrations and protests against police brutality, against mass incarceration, against the three-strike policy that the federal government and other levels of government instituted. And so you have young children, young youths going into prison, serving terrible long sentences, and the police murders of Black people in this country, especially Black men, and then COVID hit. And part of the reason why we have the death rate and the infection rate so high among Black Canadians is that Black Canadians, and we want to talk, we can also talk about a gender dimension, but Black Canadians are in jobs that facilitate contact with COVID-19. By that I mean Black women disproportionately are health workers. They are what is called here personal support workers, nurses. They're working in retail, in supermarket. Men are driving trucks, delivering all kinds of goods and so forth. And added to that, Black people suffer disproportionate rates of cancer, hypertension, high blood pressure, which is hypertension, so on and so forth. So I see a tragedy happen. I see the response of the federal government, the municipal governments, and the provincial governments as being lame with respect to how they respond to the Black community. And part of the reason I'm gonna posit in regards to the response from these people in authority, or these structures of authority, and part of the reason why Black people face these terrible health outcomes has to do with the past 100 years, the past 200 years, the past 300 years of slavery. And when slavery ended, what you had was a kind of amelioration system, which doesn't work in the long end, because it led to segregation, led to severe anti-Black discrimination, where Black people, I mean, in the province where I am in Nova Scotia, Black kids couldn't even go to high school. Believe it or not, if a Black family wanted to send their kids to high school, they had to go to New England or to Montreal or Toronto. Nova Scotia and the Maritimes was, you know, they call up here the Alabama of the North or the Mississippi of the North. And I mean, these structures are still in place in so many ways.
Professor Cooper, hold that thought for 1 second, because I think you've introduced a number of topics. I want to bring Martin back into the conversation for something, just to get some historical context here, and maybe a look at today through what he might perceive as his father's eyes. Martin, if your dad were alive today, hearing what he's hearing, I mean, Professor Cooper has basically, I guess one would say, provided an analysis or description of what's happening in North America, Canada, and the United States, from from the way police are operating, history of segregation, lack of or I should say lack of education, just not being able to even go to school. If your dad was with us today, would he say that we've achieved a great step, or would he be disappointed? I don't know the answer to that question, and maybe you do.
You know, I have to, my father was a very positive human being and always tried to look forward as opposed to looking backward. However, from an analysis or analytical standpoint, you have to look at what is. And while he would be proud of some things, he would be proud that the United States elected an African-American president. That was not the fulfillment of the dream. He would be greatly disappointed. Well, let me go back and say one thing. Had he lived, our whole society, I believe, our nation, and perhaps our world would be in a different place. He did not get to finish the work that he began. He was killed on April 4th of 1968. But I think that if he came and arrived at this particular moment, he would be greatly disappointed in the world as it relates to the issue of racism, poverty, and violence or militarism. He talked about eradicating those triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism. I say violence/militarism because we still have not achieved those objectives. In fact, some would say we've gone backward. I would say we've almost been on a holding pattern for quite some time because we just have never dealt with the issue. And the issue is, one of the issues is systematic racism that permeates our entire society. That is exactly why when Black Lives Matter, after the tragedy of George Floyd that everyone saw around the world, that protests didn't just occur in the United States, they occurred just about on every continent of the world. From the European continent to the African continent to Australia to South America, and of course, obviously Canada, but all over the world, people were protesting and saying Black Lives Matter because Black people all over the globe feel the same things, unfortunately, and systemic racism is consistently reinforced and programmed. And so that's where we have to begin and break down these barriers. And it's going to take all of us, not just a few of us. Thank God we're finally talking about it, but now we have to develop a plan of action. While there's some plans that exist, they historically have not been implemented.
Professor Jane Landers, I've got to go to you at this point because I think we're at a point where we need to talk about education and the whole idea of memory education, history, the memory of slavery. I think one of the things that when I look back even on my own education, I feel that we had an education in which we were taught about slavery, but slavery was an event. We never got close to the individuals, the people who were slaves, people who were slaves who fought against. There were, of course, some whose stories emerged, but in fact, when we think about it, you know, there are so many people who are missing from our history books. You know, people who were at one point slaves and then during Reconstruction became themselves leaders in their communities. We had an African-American governor of Louisiana, for example. You know, these are not the stories that are making their way into the history books in order to personalize in some ways the real story of coming from essentially shackles to perhaps sitting behind the governor's desk. What's wrong with the system?
I just want to also thank everybody for inviting me today. And I want to flip this narrative a little bit farther back than George started us. As you may have known, I worked on Spanish Florida, which is part of the Caribbean as I see it. And so I start my narrative about African lives in this continent in 1513, and that the whole southern tier of this country is Hispanic with a different set of laws and religion and social customs and everything else. It's a very multicultural space from Florida to California, half the country. And it's several hundred years before what you get in the school system, which is an Anglo-centric narrative that starts in 1619 and moves forward with everybody as a piece of property, an enslaved person, no personality, no biographies, as you say, George. They're property in that system. But in the earlier system of the Spanish Caribbean, which I consider our country an extension of, it's not the case. And so actually the first African that arrives in our continent is a free African, literate, writes to the King of Spain, is involved in all the expeditions. His name was Juan Garrido. We have Aztec imagery of him. And you just introduce this one character, this amazing character, and you see the difference of the narrative. You flip it quite a bit. Once you get to 1619 and the first African enslaved people in North America, Anglo-North America, the narrative changes, and it is pretty well stolen by that time, identities and lives and personalities. So that's one of the things about teaching this history differently. And because I worked in Spanish St. Augustine for my research, but I grew up in the Dominican Republic, and I just consider everything more multicultural, that Anglo narrative is something that I see as a real contributing factor to the racism that we now have to deal with.
Yeah, I think I'll draw attention to a report in the New York Times that I think was from much earlier this year, which was a textbook comparison. I mean, this period of American history, and I'm imagining that there are similarities in Canada as well, even in the United States, is not taught the same way. There was a comparison in the Times. Although, jump in if you would, Jane. Is there something you want to add right there? I just heard you.
No, that's a great start. I'll follow up, finish up.
Well, then I'll just finish the thought then. I mean, I'm just going to look at some of my notes here. California and Texas textbooks was the comparison in part of this. Sometimes often differ explanations for white backlash to black advancement after the Civil War, something that we were just talking about. From Reconstruction to housing discrimination in the 20th century. Southern whites resisted Reconstruction, according to a McGraw-Hill textbook, because they did not want African Americans to have more rights. But the Texas edition offers an additional reason. Reforms cost money, and that means higher taxes. Excuse me.
Yeah, I actually did write a textbook for McGraw-Hill for Florida for the 4th grade, where students get their local history. And I reviewed all the textbooks before then that the schools were using. And one of them said, Andrew Jackson came to Florida and the Seminoles decided to move west. And I went, what? You know, the Trail of Tears and so on. So I wrote this textbook. And I incorporated all the wonderful archaeology that's done in that state about indigenous places and about the first free black town that I researched for my dissertation, Gracia Real de Santa Teresa de Mose, which was 1738. And I put that all in the textbook, and it was adopted in Florida, but the 4 big states for purchasing are New York, Florida, Texas, and California. Well, Texas, as you mentioned, has this very unusual interpretation because the people who review the works and select the textbooks are not historians. And it comes to light again when the president supposedly is having a fit about 1619, the documentary series and publications, and calling for patriotic education, which by that he means the old white narrative that we're trying to undo. So textbooks are a tremendous problem, and I urge that we move towards more online resources. There's an economy to textbooks, which we have to consider about who gets control of the publications and who makes the selections for the children to read, and we have to break from that system.
Webster, I got to bring you in here because at one point just now, Jane said online,
George,
online sources. Yes.
George, I'm sorry. I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Ramos, Mrs. Gabriela Ramos, who is the Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences. She's actually going to do the opening remarks and also set the agenda. And what she's going to say is very important for the continuation of the discussion. I'm sorry.
Okay, we'll certainly take a break. Webster, before we go to the ADG, I want you to talk about, I'm going to tease everybody here. I want you to start off by talking about, on your website, there's something called, I believe it's called Fugitives. Am I right, Webster? Okay.
Yeah. So
hold on for that, because we're going to go, and then just so that everybody stays with us, we're going to find out what Webster's doing about fugitives. And now, let's head over to our Assistant Director General, Gabriela Ramos. It's all yours.
Thank you so much, George and Ana Maria. I didn't want to interrupt in this wonderful discussion, and I actually want to thank you, our colleagues in UNESCO, but also our wonderful speakers for your contributions. This is what demonstrates UNESCO at its best. We do not have all the answers, but we look into the people that know, and you know. We are very worried. As you said it, you have been providing some of the elements that I wanted to do at the beginning of the conversation, but I was trapped in some UN business. But the fact is that you all said it. The fact is that in good times, we might diminish the impact of racism and discrimination, because in any case, we all are doing better, a little bit better than the day before. In bad times, it just comes into our faces. And the fact is that the question of the COVID pandemic is not whether we had this terrible virus. What happens is that we had these terrible vulnerabilities, and we have these very asymmetric shocks. And these unrepresented shares of populations that are suffering the death toll in much higher shares, as it was demonstrated in Canada and the US, but it's the same, I suppose, in Mexico or in Europe, where you have those groups that have been traditionally, historically discriminated against, then they are better prepared to face the pandemic. And that's just really obvious. But I feel that with these facts and with this situation in which we are, still so uncertain, still without knowing how the virus will behave, not knowing if we will have the vaccine or not knowing if people will vaccinate or not, because the fear is really high, and therefore not knowing what the real impact at the end will be. We have the duty and the responsibility to discuss these issues now. Independently of when the pandemic is over, we need to discuss it now, and we need to bring the bright heads together to help UNESCO underscore this duty that we have since we were created to look at the question of racism, look at the question of peace, look at the question of intercultural dialogue. And let me tell you, I just took office 3 months ago, and I'm fascinated by the potential that UNESCO can have with partners like you to really put the right message. What are the specific actions that can help us address, not only to demonstrate, because I think it's overdiagnosed, the question of racism, the question of the lack of opportunities, the question of asymmetric access to those opportunities. But what do we do about it in a coordinated international way that could have more impact? In 1950, Claude Lévi-Strauss was asked by UNESCO to produce the seminal work on race. Afterwards, UNESCO adopted the Declaration of Race and Racial Prejudice in 1978, and the programmatic activities as the Slave Route Project, the General History of Africa, the Masterclass Series Against Racism that Ana Maria put together now, and Discriminations, and the work of the International Coalition of Inclusive and Sustainable Cities. So we have all that. This infrastructure is there for you to help us advance. We are actually also developing a recommendation of ethics in artificial intelligence. I'm more aware of gender discrimination, and I'm always worried about how the biases that exist in the analog world are having a lot of airspace in the digital world. But this is happening also with those minorities and those groups that are being traditionally discriminated. So we are really looking forward to use all that we have in terms of looking for more meaningful actions and to deliver plans, very concrete action plans. Martin Luther, you mentioned the action plans. I think we need that, but we need in a very comprehensive manner. The textbooks, the way we tell the story, we look at the memory, but also the way we ensure that there are equal opportunities for all. I think the equal opportunities issues is as important as ever. And so I leave you with that comment. I think that we will be learning from you, and that whenever we come out with something that is useful, we will also test it with you. And then hopefully we can work together to advance a real solution for this terrible problem that we all face. So thank you so much, and sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for your intervention and for those contributions. Gabriela Ramos, the Assistant Director General of our Social and Human Sciences sector here at UNESCO. Again, many thanks for that. Webster, I'm going to return to you because we were just about to have you explore a little bit about how you're providing some historical context to these to the stories of individuals, and you're doing it on your website. It's a section that I believe is called Fugitives. Perhaps you can elaborate a little bit more as to what was the thinking behind it, and why did you decide then to add this to the rich body of material that you also have on your website?
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be part of this this panel. Fugitive was an exhibition presented at the Museum of Fine Arts last year in Quebec City. It was a way for me to talk about the history of slavery and resistance to slavery in Quebec and Canada. Because when it comes to history, we are nearsighted, whether it be in Canada, I think in the US, too, in the world. When we were talking about slavery as an event. But when we teach slavery, we forget to tell that that's an event that shaped the modern world. You know, Europe got where it is because of slavery and colonization. And this is what George Mills calls the racial contract. And we always forget it. When we think about slavery, we think about slaves, we think about whips, but we don't understand the impact that slavery has on the modern world. Here in Canada, especially in Quebec, we totally forgot about slavery. And it's because of the work of many historians, and we have the honor to have Dr. Cooper with us today. And she did a tremendous work to shine light on slavery here, because people forgot about it. We're past, when we negate something, we're past negation, and now we're in the void here in Quebec. So the first African to live in Quebec arrived in 1629 in Quebec City. And he was a young boy, a young slave from Madagascar. And as I said, people don't know about it. So I'm always trying to find some new ways to teach people about this history. So here comes Fugitive, because we don't have pictures or paintings of slaves that were in Quebec or Montreal back in the second half of the 18th century. But we have the descriptions in the ads, because when they ran away, the masters used to publish ads in the newspapers to retrieve them, to find them. And the way they were described, we have a precise knowledge of what they were and what they looked like, because they wanted to find them. So I started with those descriptions. I had them illustrated in big canvas, like six foot tall canvas, because I wanted to rehumanize them. People that were dehumanized by slavery, I wanted to rehumanize them and show men, women, and children behind the slaves. Because slavery is not an identity. Slavery is a status, it's not an identity. And as Professor Jane told us earlier, there are some biographies, there are some people that were enslaved. So to me, that was to show those people, to show also a Black presence in Quebec too, so that young kids could see people of African descent and African in Quebec, but in the garbs, in the ancient garbs, in the garbs of the past, so that they be able to understand that there is a Black presence in Quebec, in Canada, and there have been for a long time. But also is to show the resistance to slavery here. Because since there weren't a lot of slaves in Quebec compared to the United States, compared to the Caribbean, compared to Brazil, the only way to resist slavery here was to run away. Because there weren't enough people to pick up arms, like, you know, the Haitian Revolution, like the Maroons in Jamaica, or to form Quilombosh in Brazil. So here, the way they could resist slavery was through flight. So that was to show that they weren't passive victims of slavery. And to me, it is a way to show the people their history, to show the humans behind slavery, but also to show how they were able to resist.
Humanizing and drawing those connections, I think, are so important. I'd like to bring Alice into the conversation about, because of the work that you're doing at the city level in Montreal, Alice, where I think we all have seen in Canada, in the United States, we've seen that young people have been at the forefront now, raising their voices against injustice, against racism, against brutality, and that's one part of it. That's certainly an important part of engagement. But Alice, can you tell us a little bit about how you take that energy and channel it in a way where we can begin with young people, this fight against systemic racism that continues even to this day?
Merci beaucoup. Je vais en profiter pour parler en français. Donc, déjà, merci beaucoup pour m'avoir invité. Puis je vais complètement m'effacer devant le travail du Conseil jeunesse. C'est pas de moi que je vais parler. Donc, beaucoup d'humilité là d'être avec des panélistes vraiment pointus. Donc, le Conseil jeunesse, c'est une instance à la ville de Montréal qui est composée de 15 jeunes bénévoles, donc avec une grande diversité ethnoculturelle, linguistique, etc. On travaille, on fait du travail sur différents thèmes et on produit des recommandations pour la ville de Montréal. Donc, à Montréal, un peu comme ailleurs, comme a parlé Dr. Cooper tantôt, il y a eu énormément de manifestations sur la brutalité policière, les interpellations policières. Et on a observé qu'il y avait évidemment beaucoup de jeunes dans ces mouvements-là. Donc, c'est des enjeux qui préoccupent beaucoup les jeunes et des données issues du service de police de la ville de Montréal montraient que les personnes noires, les personnes autochtones sont 4 à 5 fois plus susceptibles d'être interpellées par les services de police que les personnes blanches. Et ça concerne particulièrement les jeunes. Les jeunes de 15 à 34 ans représentent 65% des interpellations policières à Montréal, alors que ces jeunes ne représentent que 35% de la population. Et donc, un rapport qui a été remis l'année passée au service de police montrait que généralement, les groupes racisés sont de manière générale surreprésentés dans les interpellations policières. Et donc, cet été, à Montréal, on a observé aussi, cet été puis l'année passée, une plus grande capacité à en parler et à se remettre en question. Il y a eu une grande consultation sur le racisme et les discriminations systémiques à la ville de Montréal l'année passée, où nous, au Conseil jeunesse, on a participé. Donc, le rapport a été remis ce printemps-ci. Ça a coïncidé avec les manifestations du mouvement Black Lives Matter aussi, et ça a ouvert la voie à une grande ouverture à changer les choses. C'est traduit notamment par une reconnaissance officielle à la ville de Montréal, autant qu'au service de police de la ville de Montréal, donc la reconnaissance du phénomène du racisme systémique. Donc d'ailleurs, en ce moment, il y a une consultation publique qui a été lancée au service de la ville, au service de police de la ville de Montréal sur les interpellations policières pour lutter contre le racisme dans ce contexte. Et nous, au Conseil jeunesse de Montréal, donc, comme comment on travaille, c'est
systemic
qu'on va
racism.
s'interroger,
So what we're
on
doing
va
in
enquêter
Montreal
sur certains
is
enjeux, on va travailler
to
avec des chercheuses,
look
des chercheurs,
at a number of
et on
questions,
va
work with academics,
formuler donc des constats
researchers
qui s'adressent à
to
la Ville de Montréal avec des recommandations spécifiques
provide
pour la Ville de
recommendations
Montréal dans
to
le
the city
contexte
of
de ces
Montreal
champs de
based on
compétences.
facts
Donc,
in
on peut
areas
parler par
where
exemple de
the
comment
city of
on peut
Montreal has
améliorer les choses au niveau des
competence.
services de
So how
police,
we
comment
can
on peut améliorer les
improve
choses au niveau de la démocratie locale, la
policing in
démocratie
the city, how we
citoyenne,
can
au niveau,
improve
par exemple, de
citizen
l'accès à la culture,
democracy,
de l'accès
how
à
we can
l'emploi
improve
dans la ville,
access to culture, access to
de l'accès au
employment,
logement, de la
access to
planification urbaine,
housing,
des technologies
improve
de surveillance
land
également.
planning,
Donc ça, c'est assez général.
work
Si vous
on
voulez peut-être plus de détails,
CCTV, for
je
example.
peux vous
So
parler de
I
certaines
could go into
recommandations
more
plus
detail
spécifiques
if
si
you
vous le
wish
souhaitez.
about specific recommendations that we have issued.
Actually to raise the point about this issue of the acknowledgement of the police department on of systemic racism within the department, also seemingly expressed in the way the police Montreal, the way that they enforce the law in Montreal, as you were indicating, how there are minority communities which are being in larger numbers arrested and otherwise being taken into custody. Is this going to lead to any kind of a change, do you think? And to what extent can you and your organization play a role in that?
Ouais. Donc, comme disait M. King tantôt, la reconnaissance du phénomène, c'est
Mr. King
déjà
was
un
saying,
premier pas. C'est sûr que ce n'est pas
recognizing the
suffisant,
issue in
mais c'est un
itself
premier
is
pas
a
et ça
first
ouvre
step.
la
It's
voie à
not
de
enough,
plus grands
but it
changements
is an
concrets.
essential first step towards
Donc,
change.
si on parle spécifiquement des interpellations policières,
If
donc
we talk more
la
specifically
police à
about
Montréal a mis en
police
œuvre,
arrests,
en tout cas a
the
publié
Montreal
une
police
politique en
has
matière d'interpellation
published
policière
a
dans le but de diminuer le nombre
policy on
d'interpellations
arrests
qui sont
to
non fondées ou
decrease
qui sont fondées sur des enjeux de
grounded
racisme ou de discrimination.
arrests
Donc, on a
and
analysé cette
racial
politique qui a été
discrimination
présentée et
based arrests.
évidemment, on a des
And
suggestions
this
pour la bonifier.
policy
Par exemple, le fait
was
de produire des fiches à chaque fois qu'on a une interpellation afin de colliger des données
have
sur
made
les
suggestions
activités
to improve
d'interpellation
this
pour pouvoir en
policy.
tirer
For
des analyses.
example, the
Et
fact
le but,
of
c'est évidemment
systematically
derrière ça de
recording
diminuer le
each
nombre
arrest
d'interpellations non
so
fondées.
we can
On souhaite que ces
study
données-là
the
soient
reasons for
accessibles
arrest and
par la Ville de Montréal,
decrease
soient rendues publiques pour
discrimination.
qu'on
The
puisse
fact that
documenter
the other
le nombre
recommendation is to make all this
d'interpellations en
publicly
fonction aussi
available, so we
du
can
caractère
track the number
dans le fond
of
de l'appartenance des personnes qui sont interpellées,
arrests or
donc de
police
leur appartenance
interventions,
ethnoculturelle,
and to have
de sur quoi est
data
fondée l'interpellation, donc
about
afin qu'on puisse documenter et
the
suivre s'il y a une
arrests
évolution qu'on espère
and
positive. On souhaite qu'il y
based
ait
on criteria such as the origin of
un
the
système
person.
d'imputabilité et de sanctions qui
We
soit mis en
also have an
place
accountability
si on
and
observe que des
penalty
interpellations sont non
system
fondées et sont
that
discriminatoires.
we would like to recommend in
On souhaite
case
que chaque
of
personne qui est
a
interpellée soit avertie de ses
discriminatory
droits et de ses
practice.
recours,
We
comme par
wish
exemple
that
le
each
droit
person
de refuser de
be
s'identifier.
told about their rights.
On souhaite que donc on parle beaucoup à Montréal, puis sûrement dans d'autres villes aussi, des caméras portatives par les policiers et policières. Donc on souhaite que cette pratique soit encadrée, balisée. On souhaite qu'il y ait un mécanisme de reddition de comptes qui puisse être mis en place pour qu'on puisse avoir un regard externe sur les interpellations qui sont possiblement non fondées et discriminatoires. Et on a un souhait également qu'on diminue de manière globale le nombre d'interpellations non nécessaires, puisqu'on a, dans les dernières années, on a constaté une augmentation, je ne me rappelle plus exactement du chiffre, mais je pense de 140% d'interpellations, alors que la criminalité a globalement diminué. Donc, ça veut dire qu'il y a un grand nombre d'interpellations qui sont non nécessaires et c'est possiblement les interpellations qui sont fondées, qui sont sur racistes ou discriminatoires. Donc, on souhaite diminuer de manière générale le nombre d'interpellations.
Discriminatory factors. So that's what we're aiming at.
That's me being muted, and you all were forced to read my lips for about 3 seconds there. I apologize, Martin. I'm going to move over to you for just to pick up on some of what we had Alice saying. in your opinion, how is it best that communities and citizens can be mobilized to promote, one, anti-discrimination and anti-racism in their communities, in their respective communities, moving from issues of policing to actually thinking about the concepts here and reinforcing concepts that are there for understanding racism better and discrimination better, so that we know how to counter it. The role of young people, in fact, can you speak to that?
Well, I think two things. Number one, well, maybe even more than two, but
go ahead.
Number one, there has to be a coalition effort that is built for maximum success. If an individual organization presents something, sometimes it can be implemented. But when you have a coalition, and if we're talking about the United States, there's not much, in my judgment, that's going to happen as it relates to these issues if we do not effectively work to change the top leadership in our nation, meaning the president and the United States Senate. For example, the United States Congress has passed around policing, the George Floyd Policing Act, and around voter registration and suppression since the late John Lewis passed recently, the John Lewis Voter Registration Restoration Act. But the United States Senate refuses to address it. Therefore, obviously, we're having an election on November 3rd, and even in some states, there already is early voting that is taking place. So, number one, we've got to change the dynamics at the top. And then that means voting all the way down to the local levels. I talked about a strategic plan. And as I think about a strategic plan, I also have to think about that one of the things young people can do just in general. And I don't know if this is universal, but I know in the United States, if you are 21 years old and go to college and serve in the military, the ROTC, at the end of your college years, you are a commanding officer in the military, a lieutenant, which means that you would command 25 or so, 30 troops. So if you can command troops at 21 years old after college, then could you run for office as a city council person, as a school board person, which is very important, school board, I want to come back to that, as a county commissioner, as a state elected official, as a mayor. Many of those jobs are part-time jobs, and we need young people engaged in that regard so that other young people will participate. If young people are not just protesting, which is so important, but that's just one dynamic. There has to be those who are focused on creating policy, new policy that helps transform systems. And then, of course, those who are actually executing the policy, the elected officials. I was talking about education because one of the more important issues in our society, I think, particularly as we're talking about racism, is how curriculums are taught. And it has been raised by others on this call today that, the history is taught from a Western and European perspective, which excludes so many. In fact, excludes most. And the irony of it is history means his story. So European cultural supremacy is promoted because it is his story from a European perspective, which excludes and does not include. And we need a more diverse curriculum. So that's why in school systems, we need to have young people and others who are on school boards who are saying our curriculums, our history books, all of this must be changed to adapt to how the culture, how the society, how the world is changing. And so I think that we're at a critical juncture now where these issues can be heard. And maybe at one time, people didn't really hear them, or they didn't seem to be enough of a consciousness for changes to occur. I believe that now there's enough of a conscience in the nation and really throughout the world for us to be able to make monumental change in a short period of time. When I was a little kid, we used to play this game called Mother May I. And you could take small, you could ask, can I take 2 or 3 small steps, or can I take a giant step? So there were periods of time in all of our histories around the world where we made gigantic steps. In the modern civil rights movement in the United States, we made gigantic steps between 1955 and 1968, during the time my father was one of the preeminent leaders of the modern civil rights movement. Over the last, maybe 50 years, we've made monumental steps, but incrementally. And so maybe now it is time, because a lot is being pulled back in terms of people's perceptions and being able to see that there are real problems. Maybe now we can make monumental steps again. And what I know is it takes a few good women and men to bring about change, but the coalitions are very important to create the kind of changes that we want to see within our nation and throughout our world. And the goal, in my judgment, is about moving forward, not moving backward, not staying still. We don't have that luxury. Whether it's climate change, which again, in our nation, unfortunately, our commander-in-chief doesn't believe exists. And there's so many issues like that have to be addressed. Therefore, I'm hoping in the United States, Americans come together and say, okay, we want a different leadership to move our nation forward, as opposed to a leadership that is really causing chaos and pandemonium in terms of the whole world.
Professor Cooper, I'm going to change lanes a bit here, just to kind of have a bit of a conversation with you and potentially with the others, although we are in the last 20 minutes of our time. But I think it's important to talk about the intersection of racism and gender. And that's something that I'd like you to begin to maybe unpack for us, if you could, especially what we see happening in terms of in African American communities or African Canadian communities and the Black communities in both countries. There seem to be similarities. Could you elaborate?
Yes, thank you. One of the things to know is that Canada has 1.3 million Black people, according to our last federal census. And the majority of that population is made up of women, because one of the things that Canada did after it confederated as a settler state was to ban the immigration of Black people. So for about 100 years, from 1867 to 1967, Canada was officially a white man's country, and excluded racialized people, especially Black people. In 1911, there was an order in council in our federal parliament that states that Black people or Africans, wherever in the world they are from, are not welcomed in Canada. It was in 1911. And as it brought millions of people from Europe, there was a ban on Black migration. So that should tell you how the Black people who are already living in Canada, how they were treated by the federal state. I'm coming to the point. And the point is, when the system began to open up in terms of allowing people into, Black people into the country from around the world, let's say in 1955, in the 1930s, there was an attempt to bring women from Guadeloupe to work as domestics, but certainly in 1955, it took off, where women, predominantly Black women, were brought from the Caribbean to work as domestics in the homes of white people. That was the only way, one of the only ways that Blacks were allowed into the country. And these were women. And so today we have, for every Black male, we have like 10 Black female. That's not because of natural selection or women giving birth to more girl babies, which that's true too. It's how the immigration policies were skewed to deny Black men entry into the country and to bring Black women. So Black women were brought in the 1950s and onward as domestics. No matter how qualified they were, because we know that many of the women were school teachers, dental hygienists, accountants. Their role in coming to Canada was positioned today. And then when men were brought in, not as settlers, not as immigrants. It was to work as farm workers. So again, a laboring population, which has overtones of slavery. So if we fast forward to today and we look at the work that Black men and Black women are doing predominantly, and I alluded to this earlier on, is positions of what I call subservience. So this is one of the reasons why many of the people, why many of the women and the men within the COVID situation are infected. I'm talking the workers. It's because of this exposure. Black men and Black women are working in jobs predominantly that expose them to this virus. And so this is where you meet gender discrimination meets racial discrimination in the bodies of these people. Black women as nurses, as daycare workers, as personal support workers, as working in factories. One of the big outbreaks that we have of the virus in Canada is in the meat packing industry in Alberta, where you find predominantly Black and other racialized people working, packing meat, especially people from the African continent. So it is, you know, and women also in this time period have the primary responsibility of caring for children. So when the pandemic hit in March and the various governments said, go home people, stay home, work from home, many Black women especially did not have that luxury. They still had to go out to work in places that render them vulnerable. They had children. Who is going to look after those kids? Their cares were shut down. So then you had a situation where multiple the discrimination was coming from multiple sources, and imagine the stress that produced in especially the female population. And again, statistics has shown that generally, with the whole impact of the COVID, it's women who have suffered disproportionately. Now, when we break that down, when we look at the intersection of race, class, and gender, and also one's immigration status, you see the impact that this has had on Black women. And we have to talk about the immigration status because so many people are immigrants, whether they're legal or illegal. And that's another thing that has to be flushed out in terms of people who are Black people who are undocumented. And what does it mean that no, if you are sick, you cannot show up at a hospital? I know that Canada has this glorified reputation around the world as, you know, having socialized medicine. It's true, but it's also not true because some people still do not have access to proper medical care. So you're not gonna show up to a hospital or a doctor if you're an undocumented person. The other thing, and this is of critical importance, it's how the people, when we look at gender dimensions, and we have to realize that men also have genders, is that the people who are producing our food are largely migrant laborers. These people are coming from Barbados, from St. Vincent, from Jamaica, from Guyana, Black people, and from Mexico and Guatemala and Peru. And in Ontario recently, 3 migrant workers died as a result of exposure to COVID-19. What happened to their families back home, wherever their home is? So the people who are producing the food, yet they have very little access to health care in this country. And so—
Professor Cooper, if I could interrupt, because you've touched
Yes.
you've touched on a subject, and I have a question from 2 people in the audience. In fact, I'd like to give Jane Landers a chance to jump in on this question, which you have given me the opportunity to create a bridge for, which is the fact that there are other groups that are in our communities that are facing discrimination or are being otherwise exposed to COVID-19 at a greater or a higher rate of risk. And Professor Landers, what is it that we can be doing to raise more awareness about 1, the threats of COVID to these communities, and 2, which includes some of these people that the people coming from South America, from Latin America, and elsewhere, and secondly, issues of discrimination against them in terms of where they fall within that rubric. You're muted there. There you go. I think we're going to have you open.
I apologize, my computer died, so I had to get back on with you. But yeah, there were so many connections to what Professor Cooper was just talking about. And as I mentioned earlier on, the whole southern tier of our country is very diverse. It's always had a large indigenous population, a large Hispanic population, and more African population than you would imagine. So that the founders of Los Angeles were Afro-Mexicans. Nobody seems to remember our whole southern tier. Well, it's also the largely agricultural areas that Professor Cooper was talking about. And now it's a border on Mexico as well. And in the current administration, the privatization of prisons, of the border immigration system, of the police, everything is being privatized and everything is money now. And the more you can arrest people and keep them in these prisons and feed them as little as possible and make them labor for free for you, it's just a continuation, as you earlier asked us about, from the plantation system. And free labor for the wealth of the economic interests. And the other thing is that some of these actual plantations in the South have actually become convict labor prisons. There's a very interesting one in Texas called Sugarland. It was a plantation. A wonderful fellow named Reggie Moore is trying to preserve that space, do the archaeology for the graves of the unmarked there, doing research at Rice University to document this so that it will be respected and honored. And there's another one called Angola in Louisiana with connections to Tennessee. The richest planter in Tennessee owned those plantations as well. And now it's a prison, and it's where free labor is produced for the economy. And these corporate entities that run these places need to be shut down. It has to be done, or this just continues. So that's one of the connections that I see. I'm sorry if I got a little off target.
No, not at all, not at all. And actually, it's another segue. I'm gonna read a verse of what I would call poetry. It's lyrics to Webster, but I think it's poetry as well, Webster. I'm going to read this because I think this is about what we don't know, and this is from one of Webster's songs. And I'll try to do it justice, Webster. Maybe I should let you do it and not me, but I don't want to put you on the spot. So I'll go ahead and I'll read it and I'll let you comment on it. If you could see what we saw, if you knew what we know, if you could walk where we walked in the dark every day, if you don't know how it goes, then listen to what we say, because this song is the song that we live every day. What don't we know? I think this is something that Jane was just telling us. What don't we know? And why? How do we get to the point where we all know, Webster? What do we need to do differently?
Well, I think we need to listen to people when they talk. And I think that it is a big part of systemic racism, is that we don't listen to people, we don't listen to knowledge that comes from outside the Eurocentric view of things and how history was built and how knowledge is validated. I read something 2 weeks ago that I found quite interesting. It pertains to the fires in California, the biggest fires. And now the state of California is starting to go back to the natives from California and trying to do what they call the ceremonial burning. Because for millennia, the natives in California used to burn the brushes so as not to have big fires, as the one that are going on right now. So now they were excluded from doing those fires because of colonization. The colonists asked them, well, they defended them. I'm losing my words in English, but they asked them not to do it. They couldn't do the ceremonial burning. Mm-hmm. And now we have those big fires, and the state of California is starting to realize that they have to go back to those types of burnings. They've been doing this for millennia, but then the colonists came and they said, no, this is how we need to do it. This is how we do. So, and it happens all over the world, because of colonization. the Europeans came with their mindset and decided how knowledge was validated, and everything else became folklore. So we need to go back to, I don't remember the name of that person, but he talks about provincialization, la provincialisation. So we need to bring Europe back to a region of the world, and that you have knowledge and experiences all over the world with all those people who can bring something to the table and not be submissive to the European thought system. So I think that when I wrote that verse, that wasn't about that. When I wrote that verse, that was about what people don't know of what we're living in the neighborhood, you know, because the neighborhood where I'm from, Limoilou in Quebec City, which is a bit different, which was marginalized from the rest of the city. It was like, you don't know what we live, you know, come live in our shoes and understand before saying that we're bums and that we don't know nothing and that we're good to nothing. So, but this thing intersects with everything else, you know, being a people of African descent, being Black, come live in our shoes, you know, and listen to what we say. So often we hear people who say, I hear you. In French, we say, je t'entends. But to hear is not enough. People need to understand, you know, to hear is not enough. And this is, and I want to bring it back to systemic racism. This is why we need to change the hierarchy, the pyramids. You know, we need to have more people in position of power, it be in city councils, it be in conseil d'administration, it be in academics, it be in hospitals, it be in all those sectors of activities, to have people in position of power who will be able to bring their own experience to the table, their own knowledge of life and how it's going on in society. So it's not enough to have people who can feel it. It's not enough to have people who are sympathetic to the cause. It's not enough. We need to have racialized people and indigenous people in position of power who will be able to bring their own experience.
But I think this goes back to something that I have to bring Martin back into the conversation quickly. Martin, your dad was always talking about, and in fact, during the civil rights movement, registering to vote was an important element of changing the dynamic. Is it still the case today? And the challenges that we face in terms of even people being disenfranchised from their vote?
Yes, it is certainly still the case today. A voteless people, Dad used to say, is a powerless people. And one of the most important steps that we can take is that short step to the ballot box. But it makes it very difficult when you have several states in the United States that have voted to suppress the vote by reducing hours, by closing polling places. In Florida, just recently, the state of Florida voted for felons once they've paid their debt to society to be able to vote. But then they put a poll tax on. If you haven't paid your debt, you still can't vote. Well, you've been in jail, you've paid your debt, but yet you don't have money because you can't get a job because, I mean, it's really abysmal what is being done. So the fact of the matter is, in the Florida case, of course, Michael Bloomberg, Mayor Bloomberg, and some others came together to pay off those debts. However, the Attorney General is looking into it to see if it was illegal. I mean, it's all kind of stuff. The tragedy is people are trying to keep people from voting instead of making it much easier. We really should be opening up the process. It should be very easy to vote. We should be able to vote online as we are in some states. We should be able to register online, vote the same day. Everything else we do that way, but yet we have a problem. And then, of course, the mail system, which the president has interfered with by appointing a postmaster general who would dismantle systems to make it where you can't count as many ballots that are mail-in ballots. So we got a lot of problems in the United States that we have to overcome, but the vote is still just the first step. You can't just vote, you have to vote and act and be involved and be engaged.
And I think that's an important point, and it goes to, I think, what Webster was saying as well. I have one other question I'm going to actually direct toward Alice from one of our the members of our community who are following us. Also, I want to remind our panelists that as soon as we get this question answered by Alice, I'm going to go back to each of you for your recommendations, as we discussed earlier about your recommendations on how UNESCO should be moving forward and tackling these issues. How can we play a role on our side? And I think your input is very important. But Alice, very, very quickly, Paul from the audience earlier told a brief anecdote of a Canadian Armed Forces commander who issued an order that required that all soldiers at all levels will be expected to intervene and report incidents of racism. The order goes on to say that a failure to act is considered complicity in the event. The question from our member of the audience, Paul and Alice, I'll let you just answer on behalf of everybody, is do you think that should be a requirement in all police departments?
C'est vraiment une bonne question. Je pense que tout le monde devrait intervenir et agir quand on voit, qu'on entend, qu'on est témoin de ce genre de choses. Je pense que c'était le message aussi de la vidéo qui était passée tantôt, le message de Webster quand il dit c'est pas de juste écouter. Il faut intervenir. De là à normaliser ça et en faire quelque chose de policé, je ne sais pas.
Whether they should be imposed on police stations or they should be something that's policed, I'm not sure.
Mais ça, c'est un moyen d'intervenir. Je pense qu'on a mentionné tantôt aussi l'importance du système électoral, l'importance d'avoir des instances qui nous représentent. Nous, au Conseil jeunesse de Montréal, on a fait des recommandations à la ville aussi sur comment combattre le racisme dans tous les domaines de compétences de la ville de Montréal. Je peux vous citer quelques-unes des recommandations qu'on a faites qui pourraient être applicables dans d'autres villes.
Could apply to other cities.
Par exemple, la ville est un employeur. En fait, la ville à Montréal est le plus grand employeur du territoire. Donc, la ville pourrait bonifier son programme d'emploi pour les jeunes. Donc, il y a déjà un système de stage rémunéré, mais ça pourrait être bonifié puis permettre de donner davantage d'opportunités aux jeunes qui sont racisés autochtones. Donc, le but, c'est de donner de l'emploi, mais également de diversifier les visages de la ville. Webster a mentionné aussi l'importance d'avoir des instances décisionnelles qui représentent les différents visages de la ville, donc autant sur les conseils d'administration, les organisations municipales, paramunicipales, que la Ville de Montréal aussi développe des indicateurs pour détecter des comportements de profilage social et racial dans les différentes entités administratives. Donc, on parle du logement social, des ressources humaines, du transport collectif, de la municipale, etc. Monsieur King a aussi tantôt parlé de l'accès au scrutin électoral. C'est vraiment important et on suggère que la Ville fournisse de l'information sur le processus électoral et les différentes manières de voter, de se présenter dans toutes les langues qui sont parlées par au moins 2% de la population, qui est un exemple concret d'ailleurs de la ville de Toronto. Parce que voter, c'est un premier pas vers une participation pleine et entière à la société, c'est choisir ses représentants. On a aussi des recommandations pour l'accès au logement, donc autant fournir davantage de logements sociaux et abordables, et notamment des logements ou des hébergements spécialisés. On sait par exemple que des jeunes racisés ou des jeunes autochtones manquent d'hébergements spécialisés pour ces personnes-là. On suggère aussi que la Ville de Montréal fournisse davantage de ressources financières au comité logement pour les aider à remplir leur mission de défense des droits des locataires, notamment dans les cas de discrimination au logement. On a aussi tout un volet par rapport à la culture. Là, je vais peut-être un petit peu trop dans le détail. On suggère que la Ville, par exemple, réserve 20% de sa programmation pour les artistes de la diversité des artistes autochtones. Donc, dans les réseaux municipaux, on parle par exemple des bibliothèques. Donc, il y a beaucoup de choses qu'on peut faire qui peuvent améliorer les choses dans les différentes sphères qui touchent la vie quotidienne, en fait, parce que le niveau municipal, c'est vraiment la vie quotidienne. On parle également d'encadrer les technologies de surveillance. Donc, je suis contente d'avoir entendu Madame Ramos mentionner que l'UNESCO allait travailler là-dessus. C'est quelque chose qui nous préoccupe. Vous faites bien, sinon je pourrais parler des heures.
But unfortunately, we're at the end of the program, and I want to give the other panelists the opportunity to provide a recommendation. And if we have more time, we'll come back to Alice even and give her one last chance to make one last recommendation. But for now, I'm just going to go through each of you. Give me your most important recommendation. We're coming to the end of the program, and we've got to keep to our time. So I'm going to start with Jane Landers. Jane, what do you think UNESCO needs to focus its attention on?
Well, you know, we had the 25th anniversary of the Slave Route Project in Benin last year, and we noticed that the tourism at public memory sites is one of the things that drives the economy there, and yet the information is so dated and so insufficient, and it's nobody's fault except depending on printed sources. So I go back to the economy of the production of knowledge, that we have to democratize it. And I think one of the ways we can do that is have more online resources, which are more quickly up to date, which are more visual, which kids are into more, and train people that way. The production of all the print volumes, which, you know, UNESCO's done a great job on all the history of Africa volumes, etc. But how many people can access those very, you know, printed books? You can get on a little cell phone in the middle of Ghana somewhere and get much more information if it's updated, it's online, it's more visual, it's more modern, all those kinds of things. And it also then evades that problem that I keep returning to of the cost of production of textbooks, of educational materials. And we have to do it a different way. And also—
Okay, I'm going to have to hold you there.
Okay.
Okay, great. Webster, your recommendation for UNESCO.
Well, I think that Prof. Landers said it well, the democratization of knowledge and access to the different narratives and knowledge from all around the world. I think that's really important. And also to put pressure on the different companies and boards to hire people that are being racialized or indigenous. I think that it has to change to change the pyramid. So knowledge and pressure.
Great. Professor Cooper.
Thank you, George. I just want to say that for me, the issue is anti-Black racism. You find anti-Black racism wherever you go. You go to Mexico, as I've been, you find anti-Black racism. Argentina, France, Germany, even in Jamaica and Nigeria and Ghana, where you have majority Black populations, you have anti-Black racism. So for me, the struggle is against the global anti-Black racism. I'm not, what UNESCO can do, the UN came to Canada 2017. They investigated anti-Black racism in Canada. They made 5 recommendations, which haven't been really followed up by the federal government. So what UNESCO can do is to help to pressure some of these signatories of these various human rights conventions. And I read quickly the 5 recommendations. Recommend that the government apologize for slavery and consider reparations for historical injustices, discontinue the practice of street checks and other forms of racial profiling, address anti-Black racism in the criminal justice system, collect data disaggregated by race, color, ethnic background, and national origins, create a national department of African Canadian affairs to represent the interests of African Canadians. So pressure. And for me personally, end racial profiling, end racial capitalism, the cornerstone of which is white supremacy. I cannot end this conversation without talking about racial capitalism and white supremacy, and defund the police, reallocate the resources to develop Black communities. Thank you.
Professor Cooper, right there. Thank you very much. Martin Luther King III, you get the last word.
Okay, thank you. Let me quickly just say how much I have appreciated being here with everyone today, and appreciate the opportunity just to share. I have just one thing to say for everything that has been said that I agree with. First of all, I applaud UNESCO for what you already are doing. and to keep on keeping on. But additionally, I would hope that one day there can be diversity, sensitivity, and human relations training that starts in grade school or elementary school and goes all the way through college. I think that if we're able to find a way to globally teach these particular areas of discipline for children, starting with children all the way through college, we'll create a much different world at the end of the day.
Thank you very much. And a huge thank you to all of you. I am going to hand it over now to my colleague who started us off, Anna Maria Majlov, to kind of bring things to a conclusion. But for me personally, to each and every one of you, just an amazing conversation. And thanks so much for contributing your thoughts, your energy, your reflections. So important for us to shape our ideas. Anna Maria, I'm going back to you if you're ready to take the ball from me and close things off for us.
Thank you very, very much, George, for a job well done. And thank you to all the great speakers for your very in-depth analysis and I would say forward-looking and innovative recommendations that you have provided on a topic that is really of primary importance to all of you and all of us, and especially in the current context. We intend to continue and also reinforce the collaboration with all of you to better combat our common cause. So this consultation and also those that would follow for other regions will in principle allow us to better understand which policies and structures are needed to fight against racism and discrimination, including gender-based discrimination. That is very important. To what extent slavery and racism are intertwined, and the evolution of racism and its effects on our identity for all of us. The importance of promoting culture and music as a means to combat racism. The role that young women and men play in combating racism and discriminations. And finally, the urgent need to fill the data and information gap in North America, but also in all the other regions. So your recommendations and the questions that were asked by our very engaged audience will contribute to the elaboration of a roadmap that will guide UNESCO's work along with practical online and offline tools. Just to conclude, I would like to remind you all that this is the second of 6 regional expert consultations against racism and discrimination. And the third one will take place on the 6th of October and will focus on Europe. So with all that in mind, let me thank all of you for a wonderful webinar, and we will meet you soon again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thanks to our audience as well. Have a great day, everybody.
Have a great day.
Thank you, George. Thank you all. Nice to meet you. Bye-bye. Martin, are you still there? Oh.